Thanks, Aaron. My name is Chris Colvard. I'm a developer at Indiana University, technical lead on Avalon Media System, and today presenting on Avalon and IU's implementation of Avalon's path to Fedora 6. Avalon Media System is a Samvera solution bundle focusing on managing and providing access to collections of audio and video content. That's kind of just a simple setup here of kind of give you some context of what kind of content we're working with. And when we're working with it in the context of Fedora, we're mostly storing the metadata in small files. We're not storing the original files or derivative files that are very large. And we're not doing versioning. Avalon focuses more on access than on preservation. It's looking at kind of four different models of objects for how we model things out, and then a number of smaller objects that kind of come as part of that metadata and access control objects that's kind of given by Active Fedora. Another just thing to mention here that you'll hear more about later is there's this ordered file relationships for kind of keeping the files listed within a work in order. And just some quick notes of performance issues we ran into in Fedora 4. That just a compounding of Fedora, Active Fedora modeling, Avalon code, that all compounds to make two different cases that were being a pain for us. One is works with many files, and this is AV content. We don't have many objects that have a large number of files. So I know for print media, they're looking at like hundreds, thousands of pages in a book. This is a problem for us even in much smaller numbers. Something we were looking at trying to remedy. The other one is the kind of Active Fedora modeling and Avalon modeling ended up placing a lot of objects at the root node in Fedora. So our root node has many children. The majority of our objects are children of the root node. So that led to lots of problems when trying to retrieve that root node for reindexing or kind of other tasks that we'd have timeouts or it would take hours to try to retrieve it or not even be able to at all in some cases. Stepping back and looking at Avalon's history with Fedora, Avalon 1.0 came out in 2012 using Fedora 3. Step 5 years forward, we made an upgrade to Fedora 4. And in that process, it was a pretty big migration where we had to write lots of custom tooling for doing that data mapping from some of our data streams to RDF, although some data streams still kind of came along with like a mods XML staying intact. We had a custom dashboard. It took a lot of time, a lot of effort. The migration ran for a really long time. I think we still had it Avalon up and running in that time, but it still took a long time but it was a little painful. Jump forward to 2023, and we're really wanting to make the move to Fedora 6. It's been 6 years since we upgraded to Fedora 4. There's more energy towards Fedora 6. It's actually supported. We're intrigued by OCFL and whether we'll get some of our performance problems handled. But within the Samvera community, most of the community seems to be running on Haiku Hyrax, which is moving to Valkyrie, or they had their own custom apps running on Valkyrie. Avalon so the community is moving towards Valkyrie. Seems a dominant path. There's this benefit of having a flexibility on the back end, as Valkyrie is a data mapper and could support different data stores. But if we went down that road, we would definitely have to do a data migration, a large refactor of the code base to switch out to this new data layer. Haiku Hyrax had been working on that for years. We kind of wanted to get to Fedora 6 faster and not have to invest all that time just really changing out the data layer. But we knew going down an Active Fedora path would be a route kind of more on our own, it would still have performance issues um, that we knew were there in Active Fedora, but it would be less change for us. It might be a shorter path. Um, and maybe one really big pro to this would be Fedora's tooling for migrating the data that we wouldn't have to deal with custom data migration. So we kind of were looking at that route and wanting to explore more that can stay with Active Fedora. And part of that led into that decision was seeing other people's experiments with running Active Fedora on Fedora 5. Trey Pendragon, Stuart Kenny had done a lot of work on getting it working with Fedora 4 in a kind of experimental proof of concept. In 2021, I did a little bit of experiments just to get the test screen with Fedora 6, and it looked possibly viable, but hadn't really been used in a real-world scenario. So when we were exploring this in 2023, I did a little bit more work, kind of bringing things up to date with on dependencies and testing with the latest Fedora. So our proof of concept in the fall of 2023 with those changes to Active Fedora, changes to Avalon and dependencies to make it work. And some changes we had to make to the Fedora upgrade utils, dealing with just kind of some Vera and Avalon specific data and how we used things. That all in total took less than 4 weeks to kind of put together. So it seemed really promising. It seemed like a short path. And we ran this on a kind of sample data from a real world kind of small Avalon instance we have. We ran through the migration processes on the Fedora wiki, doing the export and the 2 upgrades. It ran really pretty fast and started up Fedora 6, and it kind of mostly just worked. Like we didn't do a lot of testing that Avalon would work in all cases and all edges, but the kind of the 80%, worked. It seemed really promising. We did some performance testing with on one of those difficult cases, which is adding lots of files to a work. And as we add files to a work, the time it takes to add them increased. So this blue line kind of in the center was our baseline, and that was kind of where things were at with Fedora 4. And then the lines arcing up higher were the different configurations of Fedora 6, where we were seeing that Fedora 6 was actually taking longer within the Avalon ecosystem to deal with this edge case. So we didn't really want to proceed moving to Fedora 6 if we knew we were going to be getting slower performance to something that was already a problem. To kind of look at that some more, I did a small experiment to try to get rid of that ordering relationship, that ordered aggregation that I had said and mentioned earlier. And a quick kind of test with that gave this light blue line at the bottom that really kind of mirrors the x-axis that really seemed to be pointing to the solution is really in the modeling and not so much in Fedora 6. So while I wanted to move forward with Fedora 6, we had to make this change to solve this problem first. So we spent time working on that, as well as other things, pushing towards the next Avalon release, with features and other stuff. But we did end up doing this data migration, a more narrow, more limited data migration of just one relationship into a single valued property from this linked list of proxy objects to a just serialized JSON array of object IDs. So with that kind of solved, we were able to kind of move forward on transitioning to working on Fedora 6 support. So cycling back to the active Fedora code and Avalon code and trying to make sure everything worked in all edge cases, the other 20%. And it in 4 months' time, we were able to get another Avalon release done. Again, this was not all Fedora 6. This was, I think a Rails upgrade and other dependencies. So it wasn't actually too much more work. In that we had Fedora, we did a switch over to Fedora 6. We had documented a migration path using the Fedora tooling. We also decided to turn off auto versioning as Avalon's more focused on access, and Avalon and Active Fedora would write to Fedora many, many times, creating lots of versions. So it really kind of made a problem with lots of files in the OCFL and lots of versioning that wasn't really given any value. So we made it here. It took about a year and a quarter to from those kind of explorations, and even kind of, I guess, there was this little experiments 2 years prior to that, but we had gotten Avalon code base, the kind of core Avalon, to Fedora 6. So the next step was to upgrade our local instance to this newer version of Avalon. And at this point, it should be easy. It's a documented migration path, right? It took longer than we were hoping. And we'll talk about that here. Is Media Collections Online, or we call MCO, is IU's main Avalon instance. It's just a much larger than that sample test instance. We're looking at the time of migration, about 250,000 works. We're talking about 500,000 files, kind of around 1 million derivative files from that, and overall a sum of close to 5.5 million Fedora objects. It supports a lot of different use cases and is used pretty heavily and has new content being pushed to it daily. So in our migration, we wanted to make sure that we didn't impact that usage, and tried to minimize the amount of time we had to ask collection managers not to be adding to the repository. So we spent a lot of time kind of honing the process for export and upgrading. We had started on this before we had made that Avalon release, and once we, kind of in December had that process kind of, we thought, ironed out, when we were kind of applying it to this larger data set, and the specifics of IU's infrastructure where it was running Fedora, we ran into a lot of problems where that large root node and the issue with when the OCFL is getting indexed, some of those long transactions ended up timing out, and the answer to both of them seemed to kind of be just to give the Java heap size, or make that appropriately sized. I think we just had the defaults at first, and that was not cutting it. But maybe it's kind of, Anusha said, a 1 to 3 gig, 2 to 4 gig seemed to be sufficient. A kind of troubling discovery is that we found with our multi-threaded export that we had some objects that just kind of mysteriously were missing from the export. Our workaround to this was to just develop a validation script that would comb through the exported RDF, find the subjects, find the objects, do a comparison to get a list of missing IDs, and then just resume the export on those. And that seemed to work pretty well. And with our process kind of figured out, by the end of April, we were actually able to finally move on to running this migration on the production site. This is, of course, after pushing back the date we were hoping to do it a few times. The actual upgrade itself started on the night of the 8th, where we turned on read-only mode, and then we hit some more problems where we didn't have enough resources on the system, so the export was failing, and kind of having to work through that, we lost maybe a day's worth of work there on that export. But then the rest of the process seemed to run through okay, again, giving more resources to Fedora systems as needed. Got to the end of the indexing, and I found out that I had messed up one of the parameters in the conversion that we had spent those months, tuning and figuring out. I messed it up. So we had to back up and run through that migration, like the conversion and our other steps again, which is another kind of day. And kind of in 5.5 days, we were able to make the migration, do the upgrade to Avalon, and turn off read-only mode. And we've finally made it. Uh, a longer path than we had maybe thought, but still shorter than kind of a large data layer refactor and large data migration. Some of the things we had learned along the way, um, our specific use of Fedora without having kind of ACLs and versioning, we could use the newest version of the import-export tool, which was really a lifesaver in terms of being able to do multi-threaded export and resuming exporting. Help in the Fedora Slack was really nice. Thanks, Jared, for being there for us. Making sure to have the right amount of CPUs and memory for the tooling to get through large data sets, large numbers in a reasonable time. And then do a CFL with that many Fedora objects makes lots of little files, and moving all those files, which we had to do in our infrastructure setup, just took hours, a large chunk of the actual migration. Another thing is just like when we were doing the testing of the migration process, we messed things up. We made miscommunications, we missed steps. We had problems scheduling, overlapping scheduling between people involved with the holidays and stuff, and it just made it take months, maybe longer than we had initially thought we were going to. So we had to plan, so be sure to plan extra time for it. But in the end, we got there. We've been running media questions online on Fedora 6 for months now. It seems to be doing fine. And while it was a longer process and path than we maybe had initially anticipated and hoped, it still was shorter and was still a short enough path and worked out in the end. I'm happy to take any questions. I know I'm a little bit over time, so maybe hit me off asynchronously or in other times in Slack. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I mean, we can take if there are any questions, if people wanted to ask, we can take them.